evening to everybody, all the panelists here, and it's a great evening, and we are here to discuss a very important topic. It's India at 75, opportunities and challenges. Of course, we know that this year, 2017, we have just seen the 70th anniversary of India's independence. In 5 years, by 2022, 15th August, I think there are some government targets also for 15th August 2022, and that's when we'll hit 75 years as an independent country, a very young independent country, and we are all looking forward to it. And looking forward to it is one thing, but building the country to meet certain aspirations when we hit that target is quite a different thing. And so it's quite an honor to have a fairly large panel here of top leaders and a very good mix of sectors, so that we have a really wide discussion, and all these sectors are very critical to the Indian economy as we go ahead. We of course know more or less what are the challenges and what are the opportunities before us. Probably more challenges than opportunities, but we can always turn it around and say even the challenges can be turned into opportunities. So we'll just take that discussion forward here and see how India can reach a situation of more global kind of leadership role by the time we hit 75 years. So initially we'll just start off with a 2-3 minutes of opening remarks from each speaker. So we'll start with you, Mr. Navani, and we'll go this.
Thanks, Alokesh. Very good evening. And I think when I think of India at 75 and what India can be in 2022, I think the leadership for India coming through three things moving in tandem, right? I think economic strength, technological vitality, moral leadership, right? Any nation, if we have seen, which has got built on these three pillars, has the ability to endure over a significant period of time. And I think when we talk of what India can potentially be in 2022, I think the process of getting there is also very critical. And we've been discussing project management, some time back, and I think building capacity and that capacity in nation building is extremely critical for us. And so if we have what the future is, we fold it back, I think we need to create next practices, not just best practices that will actually help us leapfrog, in this process and journey. And I think never in the history of mankind has a nation of 1.3 billion people even moved from being a developing country to a developed nation. So I think the opportunity is real. It's alive and kicking right now. And given the youth demographic that we have, I think being able to adequately build capacity in them through the capabilities of skilling, creating strong universal literacy, which will then lead to creation of urban centers of excellence, building sustainability around it, and actually getting each stakeholder of this country involved in that process is extremely critical. So if we look at whether it is corporate India, whether it is government, whether it is civil society, working together. And I think building skills, for example, is a great area which has political alignment, because it creates jobs for people in a constituency. It's got corporate alignment because every company needs large number of people to be skilled. I think we often talk of India being you have skills without jobs and jobs without skills. I think it's a constant conundrum that we are dealing with. And I think if you look at civil society, I think livelihood is such a important NGO activity even in a country like India. And we find a lot of foundations and others now, especially with CSR budgets also being available, looking at how you can enhance livelihoods in people. And the entrepreneurial opportunity, I think just capacity building is a massive entrepreneurial global opportunity. So I think if we were to take just this one area where I think India can benefit significantly from, if we are able to adequately equip human resources, I think there's a massive way forward. And I think when you talk of the how do we do this, I think with the government already having taken a strong lead over the last decade or so, and with all of the stakeholders working together, I think the challenge now for India is the demand side, right? How are we able to absorb over 1 million people who are coming into the workforce? And I think that's where we have to look at how we build capacity.
Terrific.
Yeah.
I would say that a lot of initiatives has already been taken by the government and in various sectors. But I would feel that there are three major areas where we need to stress upon. Number one is the education. The illiteracy level in India is still very high. large part of the rural population is not in the mainstream and are not able to contribute much to the economic growth. So we have to look at first the illiteracy level being eradicated from the country, and so how do we get more and more people educated is the key factor that we must look at. If the people are more educated, they will contribute to by earning something and contributing to the economy overall. The second significant thing that I see is the participation of females in the country's growth. When I go and see outside India in Japan or China or Taiwan or even Europe and US, I see a very high participation of females in every sphere. If I go and see the factories, I see most of them are, large population is female who is working in the factories. Unfortunately in India, when I see there are a lot of females who have come up, but still the contribution is very low. So we have to encourage more and more females. I'm happy to see now the defense minister is a female, and
yeah.
So that's a welcome change and very good thing to be done. But then it's about maximum participation, and we have to encourage females to come forward, and the multiple programs have to be developed to get them into the mainstream. Yeah. And the third important area I feel is the field of research and development, and especially on energy. That's where we need to have more focus, because if you see the entire Middle East growth, it's all because of the discovery of that one dirty liquid which they converted into a money earning thing for across the world, and they're leading because of that reason. We have a history which is very rich of thousands of years. We have had Pushpak Viman, which has been mentioned, which has been developed maybe 10,000 years back, but what fuel was used in that? And that's available in the subcontinent. So when we are talking about, in today's world, we're just thinking about, this is a fuel or a diesel or an electric or a solar, but maybe there's something beyond. So some work has to go on that sphere, which will really tremendously help the country into 2022 and beyond as well.
Maybe it was magnetic levitation for all you know,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, Mr. Viren, tell us more about that.
Good evening, everybody, and as
Little closer.
both my erudite speakers already mentioned, some of these areas are definitely the areas of focus. And coming from a productivity background, I would think that 60% of our population being in a rural area, and everything has touched the urban sphere, but the same doesn't happen in the rural side. So we do the same things. Like for instance, you do drying with ultimate efficiency in the urban sphere, but the same drying in, for instance, in the rural area is so archaic, and so we need to make sure that somehow we get this technology into the rural sphere, so that we enable the rural populace to become competitors with the urban populace. I mean, that would be a huge amount of
developing rural India.
So we only talk
target.
about skilling them. We talk about very low level kind of skilling. So we need why not skill them or give them technology which they can use and compete with at their own local level. Like for instance, agriculture, irrigation. Now there are so many developments in irrigation, but it is never reflected in the rural populace. We all know about microprocessor-based irrigation. You can grow anything anywhere you want now. You have a kind of a virtual kind of a soil, which doesn't necessarily have to be, and you can feed the nutrients to it. So this technology, this kind of knowledge needs to be inculcated over there. And that would lead to a little bit of empowerment, number one, and employment for the rural people.
Right.
So just as we have enterprises in the mini and micro sector in the urban sector, we could do the same in
Rural India.
So
Absolutely.
this is my
Thank you.
Thank you, Alokesh. I think my colleagues in the panel have talked about multiple things. I'd like to take a little different view. Look, India over the years, have achieved a GDP of 2.2 trillion roughly last year. And this has taken us, I think, 50 plus years to go from 1 to 2.2 trillion. But believe me now, just simple arithmetic, if we are able to grow at double digit, by 2030, we will be a 10 trillion economy. Just imagine the power of a 10 trillion economy. McKinsey has put out a report, and that has been Morgan Stanley has picked up from there, and they are talking about a 5 trillion economy by 2025. Even if you are achieving around 8% of GDP growth year on year for the next 5 years, you will be ending somewhere between 3 to 4 trillion. It's a huge, huge power. Remember, India is already the 7th largest economy in the world in terms of nominal GDP. And if you convert that into PPP, purchasing power parity, we are already the 3rd largest economy in the world. Now, this is the good part. And of course, we have the challenge of growing at double digit or thereabouts. But look at the other fact. Per capita income in India is $1,700. Now this, remember, is abysmally low. This is lower than every other BRIC country. This is lower than Turkey. This is lower than Indonesia. This is lower than Mexico. This is lower than even Philippines. So we have to do something. While the GDP is growing, and probably it will grow the way I have been talking about, but there is a problem in terms of per capita GDP. Now, I will bring the discussion to the discussion which Mr. Virendra and other colleagues were talking about, agriculture and rural India. Look at India today. In spite of our best efforts, India today still 60%, 59.5% of people are dependent on agriculture one way or the other. Now, while they are dependent on agriculture, look at what agriculture is doing. This is definitely a huge laggard. We have 3 components in the GDP: industry, services, and agriculture. Agriculture for last 3 decades have been a laggard, and it has never grown above 2 to 3%. That's the kind of rate at which agriculture has been growing. Probably the last interesting thing happened when the Green Revolution happened in agriculture, and that was way back in late 60s, early 70s. Since then, there hasn't been really a rejuvenation or proper attention on agriculture. Believe me, nothing can be achieved as far as the country is concerned unless you are doing something with agriculture, which in turn will rejuvenate the rural economy. And there are certain basic things which are going wrong. And I'll give you one example in my introduction. The farmer, that's the agricultural economy. Farmer needs credit. And the government, successive governments for the last, I think, 5 decades have been talking and pushing the banks to give credit to farmers. And they have been giving whatever extent they can. And today, anywhere between 7 to 10 lakh crore is the pre-harvest credit which the farmers are getting, or the agriculture is getting. Now, just look at the irony. That's the credit which the farmer has got. Now, the farmer has produced the commodity, whatever he is producing, maybe soybean, maybe whatever, coffee, tea, whatever. Now, when the commodity comes to the market, do you know what is the post-harvest credit? Post-harvest credit at the best from institution was 60,000 crore. Look at the huge, huge anomaly. How can a farmer survive? How can a farmer grow? How can the economy grow if you have this kind of a gap between pre-harvest and post-harvest credit? Where is the money to pick up the commodity when it is produced? I'll quote one more McKinsey report. The entire production of Europe of fruits and vegetables is lower than what we waste in India. Post-harvest, the fruits and vegetables which are wasted in India is higher than the entire production of fruits and vegetables in Europe. And that's the situation. We have to do something about it. And I think we will elaborate as we go along.
Sure.
Thank you.
In fact, wastage is one of the big problems with
Absolutely.
India in the value chain. So now you know where India is, and maybe in 5 years, what is your realistic assessment of what India can do in the next 5 years and what we should do?
Well, if we go to Vision India is a dream for the future of India. And to achieve that vision, it can only be achieved through change, and quite significant change from what I think we all would all agree. And change can only be delivered through or achieved through the successful delivery of projects. And the project management profession is all about making dreams come true and the successful delivery of visions. And that's our raison d'etre. That's what we're all about, working with organisations to help them achieve their vision and their dreams. And one of the interesting points is that traditionally project management has been associated with defence and aerospace and construction and IT, but more and more organisations are embracing project management in healthcare, in finance, right across the board, and even in manufacturing. So it is across disciplines, and we're finding from our research that organisations that embrace project management and regard project management as a critical business function and even a strategic capability are successful and outperform their competitors. Unfortunately, executives and organisations are telling us that only about 60% of strategic initiatives achieve their goals. So there's still a long way to go in that area. And if an organisation can't achieve its goals and can't live up to its promises, that's never a good thing for a commercial organisation or even particularly for a government. So by using proven project management practices and proven project management frameworks, organisations can deliver on their promises. And that is a great thing for organisations and for the country. But also by using project management practices, not only will organisations deliver on their promises, but they'll also be much more efficient and more productive in doing so. Our global research shows that typically, we mentioned wastage before in the agricultural industry, but even in the strategic delivery area, organisations across the board typically waste about 100 million for every billion invested. For every billion invested, approximately 100 million is wasted. That's a significant amount, but not only is it an amount in itself, we find that the difference between high-performing organisations and poor-performing organisations is quite significant. In fact, the high-performing organisations, or the champion organisations as we call them, they deliver, or they waste something like 28 times less than the poor-performing organisations. So for the CEOs here, wouldn't you like to be able to deliver your strategic initiatives 30 times more effectively than your competition? And certainly I think that would give you a massive competitive advantage. So we're finding that organisations that do embrace project management can be much more effective and competitive than other organisations in the marketplace. And certainly in the modern world where projects are getting larger and larger, and projects typically now are in the order of $1 billion or tens of billions of dollars, and yesterday we had the high-speed rail announced in India. Stage one was $17 billion. That's only stage one. So we're talking about very large investments. And if the wastage rates are around the 10% or 100 million for every billion, you can see very quickly, even in that one project, we're talking about saving billions of dollars. And I think that's quite a significant advantage for adopting project management. And we're finding across the board that organisations, successful organisations particularly, are no longer regarding project management as a backroom technical function or technical office. It's actually now regarded as a strategic capability and a competitive advantage for the organisation.
Absolutely, and in fact governments also need to follow what you're saying, and we'll come to you, with the specific projects about what the government needs to do in India to enable greater growth. So, your turn, Harish.
Thank you. I just want to look at this whole problem differently, and let me start with a quote from the father of our nation, Mahatma Gandhi. The difference between what we can do and what we are capable of doing can solve all our problems. I think it's a well said, and one of the ways of addressing the difference is project management. But if you look at the Indian economy, we have been saying for years that we have the capacity to grow at 9% consistently. But in the early days, we were at the Hindu rate of growth. We've accelerated here and there, and we're now back to 5-6%. And what can we do to bridge that gap and get closer to what we have the potential? One way of addressing it is project management, but according to me, the more fundamental cultural shift that we need is a lot more trust between all of us. Trust between businesses, trust between government and business, trust between government and people, trust between politicians and the voters. There's a huge trust deficit, and that results in huge amount of regulatory pressures. We are fairly low down on ease of doing business because we don't trust each other. We tried a little bit of lack of trust or easing up in the 91 by liberalization, and look what it got us. But we're again looking at a lot of regulation, and that needs to get addressed. And what is important when you address or let go is to have a stronger judicial system which punishes those who betray that trust. And I'd like to see some serious work going on addressing this lack of trust, letting go by the government and regulators what we call release of animal spirits. And I'm sure with that we may even exceed the 9% that is the potential of Indian economy. I look forward to some serious action. And again, as citizens, we need to show that we are capable of being trusted, and in all our actions, whatever we do.
I think the government has proven that it can be trusted to make some really surprising decisions at times that can shock all of us.
I don't mean that kind of trust.
Well, but trust is, of course, definitely there. It's a huge deficit. Because
all right, thanks, Alokesh. I'll just take a step back and try and see it in the context of maybe glass half full. If you take any of the developed countries, US, UK, Europe, it's taken them almost about 200 years to reach stabilization post-independence. And we're talking about a country which in 75 years is a $2 trillion economy, growing at possibly the fastest rate in the world. By and large, all metrics endorsing confidence in us and in terms of our way forward. Well on course to be a superpower. So, when I see these elements at a macro level, I think everything is looking good, and I think we should be well on course to a $10 trillion economy or maybe even more. From a prioritization and focus point of view, in terms of what should we be really looking at, I would focus on just two areas, which is typically, I think, which would be really impact/growth drivers as far as we are concerned. I think the first is building the human capital index. At this point in time, this is not really a part of our dictionary. I mean, we are talking about physical capital, we're talking about capital outlays, we're talking about trillions of dollars in terms of, all kinds of financial metrics. But we need to start applying ourselves down to actually measuring human capital. And the reason why I say that is the moment we break the phenomenal numbers that we have across our economy on a per capita metric, then suddenly we start paling into insignificance. Barring possibly maybe the carbon footprint, where on a per capita level we are fine, but on an aggregate level, we unfortunately don't seem to be doing so well. So I think this is one element that has to be a part of the language. It has to become a part of the dictionary. There's also a concept of half-life of knowledge, declining half-life of knowledge, which basically means the time required for the knowledge pool that you have to become obsolete is only declining, which means building a culture of continuous skilling, upskilling, learning, because we're living in an era of technological disruption. It is going to change the way things are going to happen. So if we don't harness the power of technology to our advantage, and by the way, we are the technological capital of the world, if we don't harness this power to our advantage, I think we'd be missing some big pieces there. So I think that's one piece that I'd like to just table here. The second is from a point of view of centers of excellence or a culture of excellence. And here again, I'd like to borrow from Peter Drucker, who says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Now, if we don't build this culture of excellence in whatever we do, and we bring in an element of speed, bring in an element of getting things done, across all possible touch points, I think once again, you mentioned project management, we're going to be getting into wastages that we cannot afford. So I think somewhere we have to make every rupee count. We have to get into this entire spirit and culture of excellence. The moment I believe we navigate these two pieces, the journey forward would be a much smoother, more importantly, a much more predictable journey going forward.
Great.
I think all the fellow panelists have really covered quite a bit on what we need to solve for in India. Obviously, we've spoken about skilling, we've spoken about educating, we've spoken about agriculture, the basics. But I think the key is governance. While you have a lot happening from the top, from the center, how is it trickling down at the lower level, right? And the accountability at the lower level. I think that's a fundamental problem in India, and how the states are open to changing their ways of doing and conducting and running the states. And also everyone's looking at typically the 5-year cycle that they're in power. Nobody's really thinking long term. And that's one of the reasons why we have some of those challenges in India, because if you gave someone a 10-year period and say, go solve for it in your state, you won't have such challenges. Some of the states have been able to do it, but with technology dramatically changing, there is technology available from the agricultural sector, on the manufacturing sector, and a lot happening in the private sector. How is the government embarrassing and making sure when they're looking at the overall program for how do we take India to the next level, and there's a lot spoken about it now on how the government will use technology to make sure those changes happen in their entire governance mechanism, and how the states will eventually do it. Infrastructure, another big challenge for us in India. I think we are solving for day before yesterday, still in India. We really haven't touched upon the future. I think for us to grow to a $3 trillion, $5, $10 trillion economy, I think infrastructure, and America's again going through the challenges. India has its own challenges. I mean, we just saw what happened in Houston and in Florida and Miami in the US, and India also has its own challenges. But are we ready to solve for in a given state? We know what happened in Chennai a couple of years ago, and the city came back on its feet in a couple of weeks. How are we building that resiliency to make sure that we can continue to grow, keeping in mind infrastructure, because infrastructure is the key. And if we don't solve for infrastructure, we will continue. No doubt the government is putting a lot of emphasis on infrastructure, but I think reaching down to the states and the entire governance mechanism is the key. All the sectors have been covered quite well, and obviously with technology enhancements. I mean, technology is available on pretty much. India has one of the lowest mobile rates, if you look at it from a telephony perspective, in the world. Access to technology is available. We used to complain about bandwidth speeds. That's got enhanced in the last 5 years, and more so in the last 2 years. But I think how we make sure that technology reaches at every level is the key. Today, the younger workforce who are in blue-collar jobs, and maybe I'm just taking an example of a driver today, he's not interested for his son to go back and be a driver, or his daughter to do something of a lower-end job. Their aspiration is to educate them and enhance their skills to do and compete with one of us. So I think how that works out is the key.
Governance, of course, in a country like India, where you have different parties in power in different areas. Gentlemen next to you are both from Chennai, so let's hear their perspective.
Yeah.
Dr. Sivakumar.
There have been a lot of topics that have been discussed, or perspectives given from different aspects of the country have been discussed by the co-panelists. India will be one of the fastest growing economies in the next 5 years or beyond, and probably will be one of the most populous countries also. But it also brings in a lot of challenges, like healthcare is one of the key challenges. if you look at today, we spend the lowest in terms of lowest in terms of healthcare from the GDP perspective. We spend only 4.17% of our GDP on healthcare, whereas America spend about 18% of their GDP on the healthcare. We have less than 1 bed per 1,000 people, whereas the desired levels are about 3 beds per 1,000 people. So we have the basic infrastructure that is required to meet that kind of an onslaught that is going to come in terms of the population. There are a lot of things that need to be done. I think colleagues have spoken about the skill development, quality improvement, and the infrastructure that have to be put in. I think all these things have to come into place, and so that the disease burden on the country will come down significantly. One of the key factors that would help to improve this situation, already in India 80% of the healthcare spending is out of pocket. Government does not spend much money. Okay, health insurance is not adequately spread. Less than 15% of our population is covered under health insurance. So all these things, if you look at it, I think lot of investments have to be coming from government and also the public-private partnerships. Public-private partnerships, even though Indian government has been talking, industries have been talking quite a bit about PPP, but hardly 1 or 2 projects have been really successful. So it's very important that the public-private partnership in healthcare should be improved so that we'll have better infrastructure. Again, lot of our medical doctors or surgeons, after the government spends so much of money on them to get trained, they go abroad. Okay, so all the brain drain that happens, I think somehow we have to do the reverse brain drain and then bring them back so that we will be able to use. So these are my initial thoughts on what we do.
In fact, reverse brain drain is probably already happening with a lot of people coming back to India and
very
contributing.
Good. It should
very
happen
good.
in
It
much
should happen
faster
more.
rate.
It should happen more. And healthcare devices, for instance, is something that if India innovates, then we can bring down the overall cost of healthcare.
Yeah, that's
so
what I will.
Big piece.
I will talk in the next round probably.
Yes.
Good evening. Being the last panelist and coming from the real estate background, most of the interesting topics have been touched upon by my co-panelists.
But there's nothing that beats real estate.
But I'm coming to that point. Interestingly, in India, immediately after agriculture, the second largest employer of this country is definitely from the construction side and the real estate development side. What is missing in the entire evening discussion, I think probably we have touched upon most of the issues, but one important issue which we have missed out is the citizen part of it. What is the contribution which is going to come from the citizens of India to make this GDP or whatever we wanted to achieve in life in next 5 years or 10 years? I thought that would be more important, because the component of 1.3 billion people, if they don't have a vision and if they don't have an attitude to achieve this, few people on the governance and few people on the private sector is not making this going to happen in the coming years. I was actually looking at rich country and poor country. What's the big difference? Is it between the age of the nation? Will it the age of the nation makes rich or poor country? I don't think so. We are 2000 years and more. There are a few countries which is developed in last 150 years with less resources. The resources in our country is quite a lot, but the human resource in our country is enormous, amazingly different, amazingly large, cannot be compared with any other nation. So I was actually thinking through this particular subject. I thought citizens is the major hurdle and maybe the great opportunity for this country to make whatever the leaders of the country wanted to make it in next 5 years. And I was actually looking at what is this attitude, how it comes, whether it comes by transforming, by training, I don't think so. It is not possible. It is typically culture of a country. And this culture of country comes through the education and probably over a period of it getting matured. So few points which comes to my mind, I think if need to be done, it is the basic ethics of the common citizen, ethics on basic principles what they believe in is very, very important. These 1.3 billion people need to first of all believe the ethics of basic principles to achieve whatever they wanted to, whatever we wanted to achieve. Second important thing probably would be in my mind is integrity part of it. If the citizens doesn't have the integrity, I don't think that, I think Harish touched upon this point on trust, but integrity in my mind is very, very important for India to achieve what it wanted to achieve. Third important point is probably the responsibility of each citizen who wanted to make what they wanted to become in next 5 years or 10 years in the coming days. The fourth one I would say, the respect for laws and regulation. Where are we in our country? We may come with great reforms, great laws, but tweaking to the convenience of each state and each people is not going to really help economical growth in our country. So I would definitely say the culture, like respect of law and regulation, is very, very critical in our country. And fifth one would be the respect from majority of the citizen and go by that spirit is very important. Of course, that one thing we have because of the democracy. We still go by the majority. We are there on the track. The next one would be, I would say, the love of work. The love towards your work. How much it is getting diluted or how much we are getting lost in these years, we can definitely see in our own organizations itself. And the next would be the effort of save and invest. How many people believe in save today? I come from an industry where I used to see 20 years before, 15 years before, not less than 40, 50 years old people will come and buy a home. Today we see at the age of 23, as a borrowing, buying a home. It's good for real estate.
You happy.
It's good for real estate, but we are not really saving. The culture of the organization, our culture of the country was strongly believing in saving, then investing. We are slowly getting out of it.
Yeah.
And another one I would definitely say, the will to do more productive. How much you wanted to be more productive in making this nation what you wanted to achieve. And the last one, and very important, is punctuality is lost in this country.
You should write down a list of all these things and paste it in every organization. You're such an idealistic person. It's really difficult to actually achieve. It's all very, very noble thoughts, very good. But you know, for an entire country which has so many different cultures, practically every state is a country on its own. You know, it has a different language, different cultures. To have everybody come together on the same, thinking in terms of ethics and in terms of very, very difficult.
But creating the awareness is with the leadership.
It will, of course, that is true. But
creating the awareness is with the leadership.
Let me just take the point slightly differently. I think he raised a very valid point regarding the, I'll put it in a slightly different manner, demographic dividend, Alokesh.
Yeah.
I think the whole world and the economists all over the world rightly believe that India will keep growing and India will have a chance of growing better than everybody else, predominantly because of the demographic dividend, which is we have a population which is young, which is younger than now China also, and this will continue for the foreseeable future. It's a huge power because people will be earning, and that earning should propel India to a greater heights. Now, just to put a different aspect, it's actually a double-edged sword. You have to provide employment to these people. You have to ensure that there is adequate jobs being created. While yes, people need to be ethical, people need to be punctual, people need to do a lot of things, but end of the day, the government and the industry and all of us together need to ensure that there is adequate employment. Because how does countries go astray? The social tension. And you go through history, there may be multiple things which history will tell you, but one single thread is economic tension. The moment you have two classes in a society, which are the income is completely different magnitude, you will have social tension, you will have problem. So you can't have an India where there is a huge gap and there is a huge number of people who are unemployed. I'm not sure if the statistics is right, but what is being quoted that every single day 30,000 people are joining the workforce. You have to create
A
jobs
million a
for
month.
30,000 people. It's a huge, huge challenge. And
True.
taking away people, bringing people to the cities, creating new cities is not the solution. Solution is creating job, and we have to work towards it.
Actually, creating job is one of the biggest. You have something to say. Say it before I
Yeah,
before I
sorry.
start talking.
No, I just thought, we've all been talking of too much of the challenges, but I think there are enough building blocks for India to propel to growth. And
Sure.
I just want to make one point here, which is what Nandan from Bangalore, where I come from, says, which is India is going to be data rich before we become really rich. If we have all the building blocks of technology, which we can leverage to leapfrog, there is a latecomers advantage in technology, and we've used that. We've got GST, we've got Aadhaar, and I think there is, we are all, at least I would like
You
to
got
believe
mobiles
on,
before you got computers.
correct. So
Right.
I would like to believe that everybody in this room, we may see the problems, but we are all very optimistic.
That's true. So that raises this huge question, and because you have been at the head of the CIA Foundation for India at 75, and it's been going on for 10 years, and it will go on for another 5 because before it winds up and maybe has a new target of India at 100 or something. But the point I want to raise is everybody, we had a very wide perspective of thoughts and ideas and challenges. The big thing that's coming through is, you have said it in different ways, human capital, jobs, right? The point is, 1 million jobs a month is, of course, a statistical thing. It's a question of when people graduate and all that. That's a different thing. But with technology, and you spoke about technology as well, with technology coming in practical and influencing each and every sector of yours, even in real estate, people use technology so much now to decide on, which house to buy. And of course, financial services, there are now, robots doing the calling and doing the IVRs, right? Where are the jobs going to come from if technology is going to take over these jobs? Where are the jobs going to enable the rural person if technology is going to take over them? So what is CII thinking about it?
No, you're absolutely right. Looking at this whole journey for the last 10 years, and of course going through 2 governments and actually building upon the building blocks, as we see, I think the next 5 years are going to be very, very critical in terms of, what you rightly mentioned, the technology disruption and all. So I think the conversation again will move from job creation or, just the nature of job itself is changing to more like work today, right? So I think the way people are going to engage, with today you see technology leading to so much, disruption around the shared economy, right? So people are doing multiple kinds of things that are enabling them to earn livelihoods, which might not be just one job, right? So, and I think that changing paradigm, in terms of how our people, the entire demographic dividend that we talk of, how is it going to actually move into, approaching livelihood in that manner, right? I think is a big discussion that is actually, going on today. And really, if you look at what industry at large is really thinking and discussing, is that historically also whenever major technology disruptions happen, it has created massive new opportunities, right? So when the horse carriage guys went, they thought it was the end and there were drivers, and now you're saying drivers will go, there will be newer jobs. So I think historically we can take, a lot of things that there has always been new opportunities. Are we going to be able to skill people at the right pace with the right kind of jobs? I think that's the critical question. So I think we've identified significant number of jobs that have started to emerge which were not there earlier. And I think there is a deep understanding of that being a big disruptor. I think today the fact that even the government's push towards, with all of digital India and all of that being so significant, the literacy of people just to be able to adopt technology is itself, becoming a big challenge. So I think at that cross section sits the opportunity for, India to rapidly, skill up. But I think you're right that it is a challenge, and it's better addressed sooner than later because it has the opportunity to create significant inequality. And I think a lot of action is being taken industry-wise, but I think there are certain underlying capabilities and more a process of upward mobility of livelihood that needs to be addressed. So
I want to throw this question open to the panel, the question of technology and jobs, and whoever wants to speak, please pick up the mic and give your views.
Lakesh, I would like to add on to your question on how are the jobs going to come? Are we really going to create so many jobs?
Yeah.
I'll go back to the healthcare again, because that is the area that I am passionate about, and that is where I am. As I said, that the hospitals are not enough, hospital beds are not enough, doctors are not enough, all these things having said, there is tremendous potential for investment into healthcare, building hospitals, both in the private sector and government sector. All this will create jobs, number one. Number two, there are a lot of ancillary industries that would come associated with the healthcare. For example, medical devices, medical equipment. Most of the medical equipment or advanced machinery is all imported. 80% of them is imported. Now, we want to use the Make in India program as an important concept, and then want the government to encourage the industries or Indian industrialists to manufacture more of these medical devices in India. That in itself will create enormous number of jobs.
Okay.
I think that the opportunities are very many.
Yeah,
You
so, this is something which is, I think, quite a bit of a debate in terms of impact of technology on jobs. A common perspective is that technology would really be an enabler. To a certain extent, if it really has an impact, it will be on possibly routine entry-level, profiles, occupations. But at the end of the day, it is going to be us who's going to be enabling that technology to do more. So that's one part of it. I think the second part of it is really in terms of harnessing that potential to, unleash the next wave of innovation, which is going to bring in the next level of jobs. It's like 10 years ago, one couldn't have imagined what we are going through today. Similarly, till the time we don't start thinking about tomorrow. So, there is so much that from an Indian context, one can actually get into, whether it is investing in renewables, whether it's, investing on civic management, whether it is investing on infrastructure, whether it is, any which way harnessing the collective potential of the country. I think from an overall employment generation impact, it is phenomenal. So I think technology needs to be viewed as an innovator and, as an enabler, as against, possibly a competitor in this entire journey. And I think we should be fine on that account.
Okay.
In fact,
I
I wanted to also add, Alokesh, that while technology is good and technology will enable us to do multiple things, every single area, I think there is significant opportunity. Look at an insurance. 15 years back or 18 years back, when the insurance industry opened up, and today there are 24 non-life, there are about 30 life insurance companies, private sector, and they have created huge employment opportunities. But that also is a tip of the iceberg. So, insurance penetration is around 15%, which has a significant opportunity to grow. Rest of the financial services, I think we are just scratching the surface. There is significant opportunity to penetrate more, and that requires manpower, that requires skilling. Look at agriculture. I was talking about the wastage. How can you prevent the wastage? You need warehouses. You need refrigerated trucks. You need so many other things. We have the mandi system, agricultural APMCs, those mandis, though they are very, very inefficient. You make them efficient. It will require lots of people to work on that. But these skills will be slightly higher level, and which will be more remunerative. Today, a guy running around and doing a particular job in a particular manner, and it's suboptimal. He's earning also much lower. Tomorrow, when you provide him with the equipment and the skills, he will deliver a better job, and he will earn more, and the economy will benefit. He will benefit. So I think the opportunities are significant, but we have to be, not only the government, I think everybody around this table and all of us will need to work towards consciously creating those opportunities. And it's not a social thing you're doing. By doing this, you are benefiting yourself as well.
I have counter questions, but I think you have a point to make.
Yeah,
I'll come to you after it.
I think what I feel is, it's very important to respect ourselves and to respect our past. If you see India's history, 300 years back or 350 years back, 25% of the world GDP was in India. 1/3 of the export used to happen from India. And we were known as the best exporter, and goods were going all over the world. today, when we go to the classroom, nothing is taught like this. Nobody tells you about this. So what we do is that we tell about the stories which gives you, that you are not good, something outside is great. And when we had such kind of a great economy, what was driving it? It was all about small entrepreneurs. There were no big enterprises which drove India to become, so at this time when we're talking about generating employment, we should, I think, focus more upon generating entrepreneurs. And that is what is the key, which will automatically take care of the jobs, because it's not possible to create a job unless and until you encourage entrepreneurs. And that is something where I would like to focus upon. And we need to respect ourselves, what we have done. We need to appreciate what the good work is going on. And that is where we'll do more good things. For example, recently we saw the government of India taking initiative of building toilets across the country. And everybody was joking around it, what is this going to help? But I found a very great achievement in that, and one significant thing is the education of, most of the girl child student, they drop out of the schools across the country at the age of 12, 13 years.
Because of the toilets.
Because of the monthly cycle, menstrual cycle, and because they can't go, because you can just go without a toilet. And right now, the figure says that the drop has come down by about 60% because of this one initiative that has been taken. And nobody talks good about it. Everybody criticizes. And it's so easy to criticize other people, but if we have to appreciate something, that is where we need to say that, okay, you have done this great job, you have done this great job, but improve this area. Okay. And that is what we need to inculcate, and that is what I would agree with him, that we need to respect ourselves, we need to respect each other more before we become critical.
Okay, as a journalist, it's my job to not respect and be irreverent to everybody, so I have
Just
to
a quick one on technology.
After Hari.
Yeah, so I think there is a big fear about technology taking away jobs. But I think as we grow, as the economy grows, there are core fundamental things which are always going to be there. We need food, we need education, we need health, we need housing, and we need financial services. These are going to be there. We need to think about what else, and those are not going to be the core manufacturing, but building infrastructure and sports, entertainment. These are the areas that we need to do. And somewhere I think we need to think of what are we teaching our children. Do we need to still teach them multiplication tables? Everybody has, by rote. I mean, you need to understand multiplication, but you don't need to learn it by rote. We need to think through what needs to change.
Yes.
On technology, when you spoke about how we create those jobs, obviously there's enough happening in terms of disruption, and the mundane stuff is obviously getting automated. And it makes sense. Earlier in the day, when you want to renew your insurance or you want to go to the bank to sign off something today, you necessarily don't have to go. You can do many more things because of technology enhancements. But from an outsourcing perspective, what we've seen is some of the third-party outsourcing that used to come into India, that's predominantly slowed down. And we've seen a lot of insourcing happening.
Right.
Obviously, the jobs are not necessarily going away. The jobs are getting enhanced. And the skill set for hiring obviously is changing, no doubt. But there's a lot of insourcing happening. So the outsourcing, obviously, sometimes what you've been hearing about in the last 6 months, we've seen some changes there. But we've seen a lot more jobs come into India, both on the tech sector, the banking financial services sector. We've seen engineering and manufacturing sector grow. As well as the healthcare and the pharmaceutical sector. To touch upon your point on the healthcare sector, while we want to build additional hospitals but look at the technology enhancements in the healthcare sector today. You can actually do a virtual checkup with the doctor because of technology enhancements. The prescriptions today are all scanned, and that data is available to know in a micro location of what was the challenge, what was the disease, what was the prescription prescribed by those doctors. And that's why healthcare companies can spend on technology enhancements, research and development to see how they enhance.
You can do much more. You can do surgeries actually from afar.
I'd just like to comment on the technology aspects. And it's going back to the point made before about looking at things from the glass half full. The studies that have been undertaken, particularly in artificial intelligence, which is the latest sort of trend in technology, is that the low-end jobs probably won't go. The middle jobs will go. The high-end jobs will stay. The creative jobs, the ones that need to analyse and think and process. But the low-end like hairdressers, the robots can't cut hair. Nursing, a lot of the nursing, you can't get a robot to make a bed or inject or look after the basic healthcare. So there's a lot of the service industries which will actually be still there. And if you develop the economy around the service industry and the high end, it's still, the middle may go, but the low end and the servicing will still be there.
Great, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, we can go on with this job discussion for very long. I'm very happy that everyone has taken to it. But let's move to something else, unless you have a really strong point to make.
No, I was changing gears a bit actually. So, I think the government does refer to it across multiple forums, which is basically moving into an outcome-based investment. And I'm going now to the sector I come from, which is education. So, if we are able to sharply define outcomes, and if we are able to therefore start designing our plans and our programs in that manner, then I think from an overall gross value added or any other economic metric that you would like to bring into play, you will start seeing significant incrementalities. And that is really what we should be looking at. So for example, if I'm just looking at life from the point of view of getting a job, and what do I need to get a job, and therefore, just exist at possibly a very low level of evolution, then it's only going to get us so far. But if we start seeing it in the context of where is the next wave going to come from, what is it that the world is moving to, what is it more that can be done, and then therefore start steering our life in that direction, then I think the true impact from an outcome base starts coming in. And that's where, once again, I think the larger planning and process starts taking a completely different touch to it.
Right, absolutely right. So let's move this discussion to a little more specific level. Let's talk about specific things that are needed in your industry to really make a difference. So for instance, what are the main projects in that sense that are needed to be done in your industry?
For any country to be truly successful, it needs a base level of infrastructure. So you need infrastructure across the board, which is the transport infrastructure, so the shipping, the rail, the transport, but also you need a standard of living for the people. So it's the your smart cities program, getting the sanitation and an area so that you can have a healthy workplace. So they're all the fundamentals that you need to have in place before you can move forward. But also a country like India, the whole manufacturing sector, I think, is underdeveloped. So if you can actually build, you've got a massive domestic demand, and that's what most countries are missing, is the domestic demand. And so you should be able to build a great manufacturing sector. My understanding is it's around about 17% of GDP, and ideally it should be could be up around the 30% when there's a target in around the mid-20s. And I think that's an area that we need to have a look at as a country, and certainly need to be able to develop in that area, build on.
So are there any specific things that you think in manufacturing India could do that the West has done, or that Australia has done, or others have done that we have not done, that you think we should do in terms of manufacturing?
Well, I suppose the thing to be doing is not competing in the past, but to be looking at the new wave of manufacturing, the new industries, the new products and commodities that need to be done. And that could be, I'm not an expert in the area, but maybe electric cars or batteries. They seem to be the sorts of industries of the future we need to be able to develop. And that's an area that hasn't been captured by other countries yet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Spoke about electric cars, so let's go to the automobile person. What are the projects you think that really need to be done in the automobile and the mobility area in this country in the next 5 years?
I think I already spoke about what is important is that we need to have a balance of what's going to come. So we are talking about electric vehicle in a very big, massive manner, that 2030 we'll have most of the vehicle as electric vehicle. We are going through a very transition phase right now, where we just upgraded all the vehicles from BS3 to BS4, and we are saying in another 3 years' time, we would get by 2020, all BS6 norms will adhere to that, which is a huge step for each of the company. And there are a lot of investments that have already been done to convert from BS3 to BS4 and from BS4 to BS6 is a huge challenge. And every company has to invest to be meeting those goals. And at this time, some comments that has come in from none other than the minister himself, stating that petrol and diesel would be bulldozed or something like that. If we this doesn't help the industry, because we have to invest a lot, and we have to actually look at what is the way forward. 2020, what should we do? Should we invest into electric car? Should we invest into this? I think the way forward is definitely, if you see some of the contemporary other countries like in China, the electric vehicles have really gone ahead. We tried on a two-wheelers, it didn't work. There are some companies which tried on an electric vehicle because of certain factors, it has not done well. So the way forward is a mix. You have to have a balance where we have to say that, okay, we meet the norms, we need about specific pollution norms, we meet electric vehicles, we should definitely grow electric vehicles, there's no two ways about that. And we have to look at some alternate energies. We don't have to just say that, okay, this is something happening in the world, and we have to copy and paste in India only. You can do some R&D, and as I said, we might be surprised that there's something available in the country itself through which we can develop an alternate source of energy, and which we can become, not only we meet our own needs, but we can supply to the world. So we have to invest a lot into the R&D and into new energy developments, besides what we have already planned. And I think more importantly, for the auto industry, it's important that we have a stability. Investor confidence have to be also taken care of right now, because it has really gone down after a few statements coming from the government.
Not just that, but also with the GDP numbers going down, I think that has
of
also
course.
had an impact. And the same minister also has also gone on record as saying India doesn't need driverless cars, because we need people to be driving those cars, right?
And in fact, easier said
Take the
than
mic.
done to get into the electric cars just within a short time. But more importantly, once you're electric, how do you refuel? How do you recharge? So we need to have a system where, like in Sweden or some of these North European countries, they have bus stops where the tram comes down and then it gets recharged at a super speed, and then it carries on to the next stage. Now we need to have like petrol bunks that proliferate our country. We need to have these recharging stations,
Sure.
without which probably this is what will happen. Nobody will have the confidence to
Yes,
get into
but the
electric vehicles.
infiltration of the petrol pumps in the country has taken several
Yes.
decades actually.
Yes.
So this
And
is also probably going
solar
to take.
solar PV, for instance, which is a very big thing in India.
Yeah.
Probably we need to have enterprises that will get into the rural area. A huge amount of fallow land available.
Yeah.
Maybe we could use application technologies with the solar green power. You have fishermen who suffer and get all their catch spoiled because they can't preserve it. You could use these tiny little solar-powered gadgets. We have some prototypes, and you can make ice. You could make drinking water from the seawater, where
Really?
drinking water is a big bane as far as
You have small kits that can convert
yes,
seawater to
exactly,
drinking water.
very small devices.
That's
You
supposed
could
to be a very
have,
expensive
You could
affair.
have a kind of a container, half a container, engineered with the local rural materials to insulate it, and have a small refrigerator to have a cold storage. All the vegetables, all the fruits, you could make them last a little longer, and then have the cold storage line function a little more.
So you're part of the government, right? So are you really getting these things done in the?
Yeah, in a small way for the rural area.
Why in a small way? It should be done in a large scale, no?
It takes a bit of a challenge.
Right. The government has also faces challenges, but one of the big targets for Narendra Modi government, which he had, right? Of course, the other big thing now is that the first bullet train is supposed to be launched on 15th of August 2022 when we turn 75, right? But that's a different thing. But housing for all, and we have two big real estate players over here. So let's talk about: is it really possible to have housing for all by 2022?
Definitely. Cities are engines of economic growth. We found urbanization is definitely happening without any fail for last 10 years. The growth rate is increasing. Every year on year, urbanization is definitely moving forward in a percentage not less than 10. So when you have this kind of a growth, necessarily the infrastructure has to be in place, and people need to be given accommodation, and habitation is very, very important. 2022 affordable housing is definitely possible, because three major reforms which has happened in that area would be definitely land reforms, land acquisition reforms. Then comes the real estate regulatory bill, and maybe the taxation part of it. I think the GST which has come in line with that. These will definitely give a clear roadmap to achieve this affordable housing, which is huge shortage in the country by 2022. But what is missing in the whole thing would be the approval systems for getting these approvals done in appropriate time to get the project started. So the real estate regulatory bill addresses only beyond, after getting all the approvals, registration. So it takes care of the customer, but doesn't take care of the development. I don't say developer, it doesn't take care of the development part of it. Unless you get all the approvals in place. The approvals is taking how long? On an average 2 years, 2.5 years to get an approval. It has to go through windows of at least 58 minimum clearances to put up a project in place. So what we were really wanting and asking the government to have that one thing in the RARA, which is single window clearance for all these approvals, and it should also be part of the real estate regulator, because the government agency is the one which is giving the approval. The government agency is one which giving the service connections for the projects on time. The government agency is the one which is giving the completion certificate and occupancy certificate and intermediate checks at various points of time. But if these authorities and these agencies are not part of the bill, how does the bill work? The bill is definitely good, very, very important for this particular industry. But it will address only one large stakeholder, which is the customer. But it is not really addressing the other three components, which is the financial institutions, government agencies, and of course the developer. Okay. So the single window clearance is the major critical part for any projects. Forget affordable housing, maybe industries, maybe large projects, even government projects. They go through the process of getting this 58 minimum approvals and come into the light of execution only after 2.5 years.
And you have to pay some bribes also to get many of those approvals.
Need to say that, I don't think that need to be discussed. We are in India.
That's correct. Ram?
I think housing for all is a great
idea,
and it'll remain an idea.
Okay. I like your honesty.
It's none of the private developers are really interested to build housing
Affordable
for
housing.
the economically weaker section.
Yeah.
What is affordable housing for a developer in Chennai is very different from affordable housing in Bombay. It's a matter of size changing, price changing.
Land prices. Like
yeah, the question is, if the government is interested to build homes for the economically weaker section, which was the intent for saying housing for all, is what can the government do themselves? One, allocate the land at an X price, and then bring in a private contractor / developer to build that home. One of the reasons why developers started looking at formats or changing the formats on what was really happening in terms of homes is the demand. One, the prices kept going up because land price went up, land raw material marginally went up. But if you look at it in the last 3 years, the overall construction, the price for constructing didn't dramatically go up. We saw a wave of increase in price in cement, steel, etc. But we also saw that come down. So if you take a 3-year, 4-year average, we're pretty much there by a couple of percent. Today with technology enhancements, you can build. You look at the voluminous construction methodologies that are available, and if you have proper planning, you can build those homes. And you can build them much quicker. You can put a 5-story building up in 6 months. So technologically, we have the opportunity to do it. The question is location, and for who's your customer.
So that is the important point. When you say housing for all, what do you really mean?
Yeah.
Right? Because in urban India, in the cities, there are thousands of homeless people, lakhs of them, who don't have even a slum to live in, right?
Yes.
So when you say housing for all, who are you really trying to? What is your view, and what should it cover, and what can companies
So the
like
government's
yourself do
intent
about
was for the economically weaker section
it? Yeah.
as a whole. Of course, the affordable housing category came into play for and basically defined the square footage,
Very
not the
technical,
price.
right?
So
Very
in
technical.
Mumbai,
Actually,
anyway, your square footage is fairly low, and
Yeah.
obviously there's a big difference between super built up and carpet area, what
The-
you pay for and what you
huge
get.
difference between Mumbai and Delhi also.
Yeah. And
those terms.
so
major component is, as Ramul said, is the land.
Yeah.
When you wanted to develop such kind of an affordable housing, then you need to really move away from the city center. You need to go at least 40, 50, 60, 70 kilometers away to build these homes.
and you can't reach there.
But when we build these
Yeah.
homes, who's your buyers? What is the transport mechanism? What is the job opportunities? What is their livelihood day by day? How do they going to operate? So the biggest challenge would be land available within the city centric at a reasonable price. Now, whether government can identify these land parcels and made it available with private developers to do it, that's not happening. Actually, most of the private enterprises, the government enterprises owns large tracts of land within the city. But when is that going to be unlocked and made available for construction?
So you're saying if that land is unlocked, then it helps resolve
It
this
definitely
issue?
helps, because it is within inclusive growth. We talk
Mhm.
about inclusive growth. Now we need people around in the city centric to make them their livelihood happening by getting their work, by reaching in time. All this will happen only when it becomes city centric.
Okay, because you entered.
Yeah, I just had a small point, and once again, somehow it's all captured in the larger master plan, but we seem to be missing it either in terms of execution or pace of execution. Now, look at China, for example. They moved to the next level of planning a long time ago in terms of, the next 20 mega cities. You're wanting to create economic centers well dispersed across the geography, which is interdependent and therefore fueling economic growth. In India, we are still confined to 5 and 6. So whether it's affordable housing or whether it is economic sustainability, if we are not creating new economic centers, and that's what, by the way, the Smart Cities project was supposed to do, right?
Right.
If we are not going to move in that direction at a particular defined pace with obviously a certain defined minimum delivery standard, it'll always remain a dream, right? So I think somewhere along the line, it's envisioned, it's got encapsulated in some master plan, but the ability to either maintain a continuity in that planning process with change in governments, or in terms of bringing the execution to come about and therefore making it happen. I think these are the challenges that we are now really, straddling. And this is what I meant when I, in the beginning, said it's about the culture of getting things done. If you've taken a
Right,
call,
right.
fundamentally believe in it,
That's where
we
your
need
skill
to
comes
find
in.
ways of getting it done.
In fact,
Vikas had a very valid point. And there are some state governments actually doing it. There are state governments specifically ensuring to live up to the motto of housing for all. And then they're also saying, we'll give you fiber to your home so we can figure out how you live.
So which state governments are you talking about?
We're seeing it happening in Telangana. That's one state. And you will see states then competing with each
You
other.
don't believe it? You don't.
Uh, Again, states will eventually compete for investments with each other, and you will see some states do better than the other states when they look at infrastructure, when they look at overall development, and the growth of that state will obviously see. But then again,
Okay.
see, I wanted to, Alokesh, just bring the discussion to a slightly different area. I think all we are talking about, end of the day, requires significant amount of investments by the government. Whether we are talking about smart cities, whether we are talking about all this infrastructure build which has to happen, requires trillions of dollars. And where is this money going to come from? And that's a huge
Good
challenge for the
question.
government. I strongly believe that, look at what kind of money is coming to the financial markets today. The whole world is keen to invest into India. Domestic investments is coming. Every single day we see huge amount of money coming to the markets. I think the government has to work really quickly and try and tap into this money. Maybe some kind of large infrastructure bond, maybe some kind of instrument whereby the government can tap this money and use it for infrastructure build. whether it's making land parcels available, whether it's building the smart cities, whether it's building all these bullet trains. And we are talking about creating a network of bullet trains. And I'll tell you something, the whole idea of how will people, well, how will it be viable if you're building something about 70 kilometers, 100 kilometers away from the city center? Nobody's going to stay there. But they will stay provided you have a bullet train, provided you have a cheap means of transportation. And all this requires government to come in, because private sector cannot do it. At least initially the government has to do it, and it requires financing. And that financing innovatively has to be done today. Without that, I don't think we're going to move anywhere. That is very, very critical, and the government of India, I think, is cognizant of that challenge. I'm sure they are working on it.
So you are the financial expert on this panel.
Well, I think,
you tell us.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. There's some kind of large infrastructure bond, and this has been tried and tested in different parts of the world at different points of time.
Right.
And that's the solution. You have to do that. Something like that needs to be done to create that. You know, you can get a Japan to finance one bullet train. You can get maybe some other, France to finance one more. But China to finance one more. But, obviously you can't let China do the entire network. Then you are, selling yourself to China. You won't do that. So somewhere you have to build your own financial muscle. And you have to access funding independent of the supplier.
Can I slightly disagree? I think there's a famous slogan which
Ronald, to a large extent, not just like
Ronald Reagan said. He said that the most fearful words are, I am from the government and I'm here to help. So I think, we should not ask the government to do all this. What the government should do is to create an enabling atmosphere for people to do it themselves, whether it's building houses, whether it's building infrastructure. If you want the government to do it, we will only pay more taxes, we will have inefficiencies and huge cost overruns. So my suggestion is, let's ask the government to create the atmosphere where, if it is land parcel release, let them do that.
And the financing. The financing. Somebody needs to have the money.
They can raise the money.
Today, if the government gives a tax break to some institutions, they will raise the money happily.
I was saying the government should create that enabling rather than we expect the government to do it.
You're right.
So,
I mean that.
Yeah. So
I'll just give you an example of China. In fact, we
all love China.
We did a feasibility. The police department in China basically was sitting on land parcels, and they put good use to it by building commercial developments that basically paid better salaries to them. They were earning rental income out of it, and they were able to provide better housing for their staff. So we took this proposal to one of the state governments and said, why don't you look at it? He said, forget it. The bureaucracy will get involved. I'm not unlocking my parcels.
No, I'll give you an example of the railways.
The railways
have last 3 years,
same.
3.5 years they've been trying. And they own the largest parcel of land in India.
Absolutely.
And they haven't been able to monetize even a single piece of land till date. And the clear mandate was that do it. It hasn't happened.
Absolutely. Mike.
Airport Authority of India has the largest parcels within the city. They couldn't able to unlock.
At least the few private airports that have been created newly have managed to do it. I mean, Delhi's done it, Mumbai's done it, Bangalore's done it. Unfortunately, Chennai didn't because the government built.
Still a long way to go. But
what's
some development
the quality of airport that we have is what it is.
Right. So
the private operators have done. So there is an endeavor, serious endeavor, which is there right now, which is a good thing.
I completely agree, because if you see the airports across the country, and I travel quite a bit even to smaller cities, smaller towns rather, it's transformed. Undoubtedly it's transformed. Okay, you can always say that the private operated airport is better than AI operated, but sea change. The smaller cities, all of you go, you can see that.
Service levels are much superior in a private
That
operated
I agree.
place.
That I agree.
Than AI.
But things have changed, and things have changed for the better significantly.
Even commercial exploitation of the land that they have. So there's a serious endeavor towards that, which was missing earlier. And now I can seriously see that they are making efforts, and there's a review happening every week on this. So because of I have the preview information for all that. So there are a lot of efforts which are there.
I'll come to Harish, because you are the advisor here. Right, you earn money by advising people. I wish I could do that, but I don't have your capability.
I hope we are earning enough.
But you tell us, if you were to advise these industries or the government or overall, as to what specific projects does India need to do over the next 5 years, to achieve all the objectives or any of the objectives that we are talking about. Let's just take, you know, double-digit GDP growth, which will enable a lot of things that we are talking about here, right? What do we need to do?
Well, I tried to allude to that in the beginning. You know, I think the big change that is required is in ensuring ease of doing business. I think everywhere, and that can be done when the government trusts people, and where people don't honor the trust, they are punished. If you look at, I mean, just look at startup policy. Beautiful policy, meant to encourage young companies, but it's spun around in that, you know, you are only going to get the benefits if you're an innovative startup. And now somebody in government will decide if you're innovative or not, and they have a set of rules and processes to go about doing that. So, you know, and that, why do they do that? Because they're worried that lots of people will misuse the policy. So this constant worry about misuse, and, you know, again, in terms of enforcing contracts, we are number 172 out of 175 in the doing business rank. That comes again because we don't trust the people. I think that is the one single agenda. Reform the judicial system to punish people who misuse, and let go as much as possible of bureaucratic controls. I don't think the government needs to do anything else. Yes, there will be people who will take advantage, catch them and punish them, but, you know, don't try to dictate how you do, what you do. You know, if you take GST, fantastic initiative, but there is a unjust enrichment clause. Now, somebody will sit in judgment on unjust enrichment and create issues. Now, again, startup, you saw the announcements in your newspaper yesterday, that they are going to question the excess valuation. If I have paid you a particular value and you in the government say this is excess, I'm going to treat it as income. So somebody is going to sit in judgment on this. So the less you interfere in all this, in my opinion, we have moved quite a bit in this direction, but I think that's where
I think
the
one
gap
of the
needs to
main
go.
things
That's the only project I would suggest. We
Right.
can do
In
any
fact, it
number
is
of
one of the things
across.
that the Prime Minister himself said, you know, less government, more governance.
Exactly.
Right?
So, you know, he needs to
uh,
get that down into all the, I mean, I think he's very clear that's what he wants to do, but he needs to get that filtered down.
So we are almost out of time, but there's one piece that is really very, very important. You wanted to say something.
Yeah, we have been talking about infrastructure, we have been talking about investments, we have been talking about various things. But by the 75th year of India, I think we also need to have healthy people. So that is where healthcare is very, very important, and a lot of investments have to be coming into healthcare, both from the government, private sector, foreign direct investment, and also a lot of manufacturing encouragement has to be done. As somebody said before, there is a lot of capability to consume whatever you manufacture in India, even in the healthcare. Okay, today we are struggling. I'll give you an example. Many of the big government hospitals are medical research institutions, buy equipment, and they are lying idle for want of repairs, because money has not been allocated for annual maintenance contracts. Okay, heavy equipment or expensive equipment which is bought with crores of rupees, the taxpayers' money is unutilized. I think, you know, we need to take a look into it, and that is very important, so that we will be able to give more affordable health care from the public sector if we are able to use the equipment that is there. So this is one example. So if you are able to develop the skills of the people, if you are able to encourage the manufacturing of both the main equipment and also ancillaries, I think that would
Right.
help
So even
quite
simple,
a bit.
small, sure, of
Baba
course.
Ramdev will ensure we don't need all the healthcare.
I don't think so. Baba Ramdevs will be there, and also the health.
Both are required.
Both are required.
I would like to, because I think you are going to conclude. Before that, I would like to
There is
highlight
one more piece
point.
that I'll come to before I conclude, but please.
But I just wanted to share one thing that I highlighted, you know, but everybody ignored it very conveniently, and that's about the participation of females in the progress of the country.
Yes, we missed
You know,
that.
even
True.
first pledge that I want from you, that the next CEO panel will have at least half of the females.
You have to find them for me.
Yeah, I can help you out. There are many across the country. But it's so important that, we very safely ignore half of the population of the country.
Yep.
And we safely talk about big things, but we ignore that. Unless and until we do that, everything else will not succeed.
So my question to you is, there's a lot of symbolism around women in this country, right? They're goddesses, we worship them when they're made of stone.
Yeah.
When they're made of flesh and blood, we look at them differently. A lot of the initiatives and all are all symbolic. Even the new defense minister being a woman, so what? If she's capable, she's a good defense minister, otherwise she's not.
Yeah.
So the point is, how do we go beyond symbolism into real action? What is the action that we really need to take?
See, we all have to encourage, instead of saying government has to do something like that, we have to encourage them in our own organizations. We have to do, each one of us have to do that. The prime minister of the country for a couple of decades was a female, but what happened post that is like, again, we are back. If you see the world over, you just have to go to any other country which is already developed, as on a door of getting declared as developed, there the female participation is high. In our country, is still.
But Pankaj, I'll tell you something. I think it's happening today.
It's happening.
It's happening today.
But it is just. I'm not saying that it's not happening, but the participation has to be much more.
But I'll tell you something. In your organization, my organization, all our organizations, I don't think today when I'm interviewing a candidate for whatever the role is, whether it's a male or a female, I don't care. And I think it's pretty much same, Lokesh. So what you're saying is absolutely right. But I think corporate India unconsciously is doing it. I don't think any corporate consciously, I don't know about manufacturing floor, but other than manufacturing floor or a real estate construction site, I don't think we demarcate today, which is a good beginning, I would say. I agree with you.
In construction site, the unskilled labor,
Maybe,
will
yeah,
almost
women are
about 50-50
So-
on the female participation. Their
So-
participation on the unskilled area is quite a lot,
And I can tell you something, when we all started working, I think not even 10% of women were working. Today, when I look at the kids, I think every single girl wants to work and probably are working also.
So
it's
what
very
do we
rare
need to
that
do?
somebody doesn't work.
So taking into account that a lot of it is changing, but a lot of it is still
Of
not
course needs
changed.
to
There
happen,
are
but it's changing.
perceptions. There are feudal kind of mindsets still there. You have to start with your own family before you get into the organization.
I agree.
Absolutely,
But
yeah.
what do we be in this situation? What more can be done?
See, it's about more. We have to open our minds to give more opportunities. Like we said that we would give in X, we will give in Y. Like we say very safely, females can be in HR, female can be in human resource, in the finance, this field, but or teachers, but not beyond this. And the classic example is the manufacturing. You go to any part of the world which is developed, and you go to the manufacturing unit, and you find mostly they are females. And you go to most part of the country in India, and you hardly find
I
anybody.
think
So
manufacturing
that
is
is the
I agree.
mindset.
I agree. Manufacturing.
And it's not that they would find, if somebody wants to do it, she will anyway do it. But broadly, we have to provide that infrastructure. As an economist, I have to think, if my 45% or 48% of my population is not participating in growing the economy, how can we grow?
Absolutely.
Perception change is required across. Maybe
yeah.
the policies need to be looked into.
Okay. So I'll finally come back to the one piece that I've been missing, and that is education, because you are the education representative here. Now, you made some points about entry level. We should not be thinking about entry level. But the question also is that the 1 million jobs that are coming, they're all coming into the entry level. So the entry level jobs also need to be there. But more importantly, as we all have witnessed over the years, and now when there are horror stories coming from everywhere that graduates and postgraduates are working as sweepers, and doing menial jobs because there is no job. So, and we all say that the education system in India is faulty and it's a mess, and we are not doing it the right way. So what is the right way really? How do we ensure that when the entry level jobs, whatever is there, when these people come into the workforce, that they are adequately equipped to do it?
So that's a very loaded question. Let me try. Okay, I think first and foremost, the approach has to be in terms of educating for employability. Now, that could be in the formal sector or the informal sector, which means entrepreneurial, or you're getting into another defined path that you'd like to follow. The second is in terms of imparting of skills, imparting of knowledge, which is able to facilitate that process. So today what happens is, if you don't have a correlation between the input, which is education, and an end output which you would wish to have, it's like, again, in the beginning I was referring to, if it is, for example, if you believe renewables is going to be the next new growth area, or artificial intelligence is something which is now, I think, an overused word that one is talking about, but still you cannot undermine it. If you're not defining very clearly where that next wave of growth is going to come from, and then therefore, how do I build the requisite skills in our youth to be able to harness that potential, I think we'll always have a handicap on our hands. So I think that's really where it is at. Now, what can we do about it? There are two parts, and this is something that we are attempting globally as a corporation. I think first and foremost is universal access, which means harnessing the power of digital. So, because the physical infrastructure will only get you so far. And thankfully in India, we are quite well off, reasonably well off, if I may say so, from a larger digital connectivity point of view. So if we can reach out to those millions and millions of youth and help upskill in a relevant manner, I think that's the first big step forward. Digital also has a separate connotation, and this is a project that Pearson is doing with IBM. We are leveraging their Watson engine in terms of trying to bring in the element of artificial intelligence on personalization of education, because if every child thinks differently and every child has a different way of learning, you cannot have a one-size-fits-all approach in terms of helping that child harness his or her potential. So once you have a base on which you can actually evaluate how the children are navigating their learning journey, and then on that add in the extra values in terms of how would you be able to input literally at an n is equal to 1 kind of a level from enhancing of skills, you would have a completely different level of workforce available to you, and that's what would be your entry into the knowledge economy. Otherwise, we run the risk of really working at a relatively low level of evolution, which is not going to get us very far. So, I think that's the critical piece on education that needs to be brought in. One last piece over here is autonomy. I mean, the government again is talking about institutes of excellence, global excellence. If you look around you and you look at any institute in the global context, by and large, it's complete autonomy. They would be supported by the government in terms of funding for research. And research, by the way, is a primary criteria on the basis of which you're really evaluating how good and how future-focused is that particular institute. But there is no over-regulation or over-supervision in terms of what you can do or can't do and stuff like that. I think that's the other direction that needs to be looked into. Once we get these pieces to kind of toggle with each other, I think the end output impact would be disproportionate.
So I think that, of course, wraps up the whole discussion very, very nicely. But what you're saying about the autonomy piece also has two sides to it. You have an ISB and you have the fly-by-night operators. So an ISB which doesn't have any accreditation with any government agency or any technical education thing is universally recognized as possibly one of the best.
So there's this concept we all use in the private sector, which is self-governance and validation. We have to move to that level. You can't have a police state. You can't have someone who's always trying to look over and see have you cheated some or short-circuited some part of the system. I think at some stage we have to rise to that level. When we do that, I think the resources then get deployed where they're needed the most, as against just trying to regulate and police and ensure that no one is beating the system. So that's your example of ISB versus possibly the rest of the world. So
I mean, what happened to IIMs last
What
year?
happened to IIMs? Okay. So that brings us to the end of this discussion. Thank you all very, very much. I think we've had a really great discussion. There's so many thoughts and so many ideas, so many suggestions. I hope we can all move to solving all these. The challenges at this point seem to be far more obvious to us than the opportunities. But I'm sure once the challenges start getting resolved, the opportunities will also start opening up. And that is the kind of India that we want to look forward to in the 75th anniversary, and hopefully that bullet train will also meet us on 15th August. Thank you very much.